I could cry. That's so pretty.
Hello everybody, welcome to Catherine Sews. Thank you so much for joining me today. Recently I went thrifting for sundresses and this is one of the ones that I found and I absolutely love it. I feel like a Greek goddess in this dress, but there was just one thing that really bugs me about this dress, and that is how the trim goes along the bottom of the front but then stops dead before it goes onto the back. Oh, that's just one of my pet peeves, when trim doesn't go onto the back of a garment. It makes it look cheaper, doesn't it? So that's job one, is to fix that. And I think I see a really easy way to fix that. So that won't take too long. That's not the main part of the show today. Today I'm actually going to take this dress because it's such an easy, simple style. It's so straightforward, and yet I find it really flattering, super easy to throw on. So I'm going to knock it off. I'm going to trace it onto paper, make a pattern that I can use again and again, make variations on it. And so today I'm going to make it out of this beautiful silk that I have in my stash. And it's real silk from Italy, like it's beautiful. So the first thing is going to be just to fix this one, to make it so that I don't feel like apologetic about the back of the dress. It's only going to take a couple minutes. So if you're interested in that, let's get busy.
To fix the problem, I removed the wide trim that ran horizontally across the bottom of the dress. I cut it down to look the same as the narrow trim, and then joined a bit of it to the bottom of each piece that ran vertically, and then sewed it back down. Well, that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. The pattern's not perfect. I don't think you'd ever think twice about that. So it still doesn't have trim on the back, but that doesn't bother me now that there isn't a horizontal line stopping abruptly at the side seam. So now I'm in love with this dress and I'm ready to knock it off in that silk. So let me show you how I'm going to make a pattern very easily from this dress. Usually my problem is black on black, but today it's white on white. So I hope you can see well enough. I would normally trace a pattern like this using a pencil, but I want you to be able to see. So I'm going to use my friction pen because I don't want to get Sharpie on the white dress. I've got just the edge of the paper there, and I folded the back of the skirt in half, nice and neat, like making sure my side seams are even. And I've just slid my green cutting mat underneath because, of course, I want to use my killer wheel or my pointed tracing wheel. If you don't have something like this, you can just use a pin. But what I want to do is make a line of little dots just along where my side seam is. It's gathered up here. So to deal with this gathered part, I'm just going to stretch it out. Right? This, I know, comes right to the edge of my paper. That's fine. So now I can mark the top of the waist seam here and there. So that's the back of the skirt, like really that simple. And now that the fabric is out of the way, then I can use a Sharpie. The Sharpie is just more permanent than the friction pen. On any skirt pattern, you want to make sure you have a right angle at your seams. And so that's why I've got the curved ruler out. Typically, there would be a right angle here too, like this would be a bit of a curve. I think I will just drop that a bit. That's just more normal. I just have to add seam allowance now. I use one of these see-through rulers to add seam allowance. For me, this is the fastest way. And I'm just putting the 1/2 inch line along my original line and then drawing there. If my line curves a bit, then I just follow the curve with my ruler. And I'll just do the same amount with the hem. And this one is cut on fold. There's one piece. To deal with super rolly papers, I just bring it down off the table and either press my body against it or just my arm with the curve coming towards me. And there you go. I'll just follow the exact same step to make the center front panel and the side front panel. Starting with my friction pen right along the edge. That's the top of the slit. Once I can't access the edge anymore, that's when I switch to the pointed tracing wheel. But I keep it spread out here. And then I have to deal with the gathers. Pull that towards myself. Then I'm marking the seam here. And then stretch across. That's where it wants to lay flat. And then use the tracing wheel there. I think I have a link in my description to tools like this. I definitely have the friction markers. If you don't have a pointed tracing wheel, that's no problem. You can just like poke with a pin along your seam the same way I did in the video about duplicating yoga pants, which I'll link right here. also to the hip curve. I'm sure there is a link. For me, there's always variation in the little ticks that I've placed. And so I kind of go with the average, erring probably toward the outside of those marks instead of to the inside. Definitely keeping the right angle at the center front and then blending to my mark at the seam. And then seam allowance, 1/2 inch. And shifting my ruler around this curve. And then this one is also cut on fold. Center panel, I hope you love my Canadian spelling. Cut one on fold. Alrighty, that will be good. Because I've got nice see-through fabric here, I can put the edge of my slit right onto my black line, and then that gives me my seam allowance sort of already built into the edge of the paper there. I'm noticing here I won't have space for seam allowance. That's okay. I think I'll just tape on a piece there. Good. And then up here. And then as I'm getting closer to the gathering again, I just need to keep the center edge at the black line, pull this across, and see where it extends to. Right there. Right there will do. Tracing wheel right through there. Okay, it would definitely be straight from the hem to the hip. Sometimes I can combine 2 rulers, and that looks pretty good. Good. This side panel is sort of flared on both sides, so its grain line runs right in the middle of it. So this is the side panel. Now before I finalize it, I need to make sure it actually matches to the center front panel and also the back, because it connects both. Alright, I'm adding on a smidge of paper here. I think there really is a little bit of a curve at that seam, just like I drew on the center front panel. This one should have the same kind of curve. So these two are going to be sewing together, so I really should have that same curve reflected there. And you probably can't see, but I can see that's where the top of the slit is. So the length of the 2 pieces was totally perfect. It was just that curve that I neglected to include on the first go. So I don't have to use the see-through ruler to make the seam allowance on this one because I'm just duplicating it off the other. Now I need to double check this edge of it against the back piece. So this is the top of the slit. Okay, so here's the back. It will be sewing to this edge. I've got to get this little corner up against this one because this already has seam allowance. So that corner goes to there. This one comes down. And again, the lengths are perfect. And the shape is good too. The curve of it is good. Okay, so I'm just going to go with that. Perfect. These 2 are going to sew together. I want to place a notch to help me match them up okay. When I'm sewing though, I don't want to get confused with this notch. This is the side that sews to the center front panel. And so I want to differentiate the side that sews to the back. That means I don't want to have a notch that is in this area. That would confuse me when I'm sewing. So you know what? I will do 1 notch down here and 1 notch up here. Alrighty. And then when I have those right together, I can duplicate those notches on here. There and here. I was just shy of paper a little bit there, so I'm just going to tape on another piece so that I have room for seam allowance. So there's the lower notch, and there's the upper notch. I'll just cut this out. Good. And then I'm going to fold this in half to find the grain line. The grain line goes right down the middle of this piece because it's flared on both of its sides. And this is side front panel, and that's going to be cut 2. Now the bodice. Again, I just want to bring my side seams together to make sure everything stays neatly in half. We only ever trace half of a garment if it's symmetrical. That's what keeps the symmetry, right? If I trace this out whole, it would not end up being symmetrical. It's shorter, and so the gathering becomes more tricky to deal with. In the skirt, I could deal with like 80% of the skirt before I had to deal with the gathering. But here, it's a little trickier to get this part to lay smooth. I want the upper part to be laying smooth, marking the side seam around that curve. There's the top of the peak, and then that center front edge. Good. What's really handy is if you have a big cork board, you can actually thumb tack your corners in, and then you can stretch out and thumb tack it down. That is super handy. I don't happen to have a big cork board, so I am just going to make do with stretching. So I want to make sure this point doesn't move. This comes straight down to that. Good. Then back over here, this was in line with this. And now I'm holding with my elbow. And this is going to come to that point at the center front. This is going to stretch over all the way to here, which is more than I thought it would. And it's so thick, I don't really want to use the sharp tracing wheel there. I'm just going to peek under and make my point. There, that's easy. Good. It's just a straight line there, straight line here, making sure that that is a right angle. That'll do. And then I'll do 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Okay. And this is also place on fold. And this is front bodice. Now, I have to decide how I'm going to finish this. This dress is just single layer, and then they finish the edges with bias. I have a video on doing a camisole with this kind of bias, where the bias comes right into the strap. It's really beautiful. It's such a nice trim, but it's so fiddly and finicky. I don't think I'm going to do that on this dress. I think in this case, I will just make a facing. So I will show you how to do that. All right, so same process for the back. Here's where we get tricky. Get that point in place and then stretch across. I'm holding my finger there, peek underneath. There's my corner. Right angle at the center back. I need a little curve, straight to there. Good. Also cut one unfold. And now I'll cut those out and then we'll make the facing. So to do a facing for the front and back bodice, all I want to do is trace the top edge. I know that's a straight line. Even just a 2-inch wide facing will be fine. So I'll just follow that. And then from here at the sides, also 2 inches. And then this just curves in. You don't kind of come up into a point for a facing. You just curve that in. That is now the front facing. I'm going to cut one of interfacing and one of fabric. Good. Same thing for the back. 2 inches, and then they just curve in together. Good. So this is the back facing. All right, you know what? We're ready to cut out this dress. If you've never knocked something off before, or even if you're just not as foolhardy as I am, you would do a muslin. You would cut this out of unbleached cotton or a sheet or anything and test it out. I am just maybe a little overly confident, one might say cocky, but I'm just gonna go for it. On a fabric like this, you do have to worry about headlights. Do you know what I mean? I want to be careful of where I place the circles on the front bodice. I don't want headlights. I want to have my selvage parallel to that fold line, just to make sure that I haven't distorted the fabric at all. Everything is laying nice and smooth. So that should be nice. Nice. Beautiful. Oh my gosh. A sharp rotary cutter through silk. That is just one of life's greatest pleasures. Good. I just held it up to me. No headlamps. There were some scrap pieces included with this fabric, and there are 4 almost perfect pocket pieces. Well, that just sounds like destiny, doesn't it? I think I better do pockets. So what I did is I just trimmed the pocket down to a more reasonable size and then made a notch at the beginning and ending of the opening. So that's 6.5 inches from there to there. And I cut the back neck facing as well as 2 straps on the bias. They're 1.5 inches wide. So these are a little extra long. I'll trim them down as I'm sure. Just a small snip at my notch. I'll just finish cutting out the other 2 skirt pieces and then we can start sewing. Last thing is interfacing for the front and back facings. This lightweight tricot interfacing, it'll be perfect for this lightweight silk. I like to get all the interfacing pressed on before I start to sew. I'm at my machine with all of the pieces cut beside me, and so now I'm just going to be sewing in rounds. So I'll sew everything that I can sew. So I'm starting with the two facing pieces, front and back, right side together. I'll be using a universal needle and regular poly cotton thread for this whole project. And I'm just going to chain together parts that are all going to be serged. And then the bodice pieces, front and back, right side together. I did do a test on my machine to make sure that the needle was handling this fabric nicely. No pulls or snags. It's all good. Both sides. So now I've got a chain of 4 seams that all need to be serged. And I'll just bring that chain over to the serger. And then I've got my 2 straps, right side together. And I'm going to stretch these a bit while I sew them. It looks good. Okay, there are the 2 straps. And now, starting with the pockets. So these are the 2 side panels. There's a notch that's higher. Good. So I know that this is my side seam. I'm just going to put 1 pocket piece to the top of each panel. And I do my pockets a little bit differently from most commercial patterns. So I just got the pocket to the top of the piece, but I'm not going to start sewing at the top. I'm going to start at that notch with just a small back tack, and then I'll stop at my second notch. And those are the 2 notches that I cut 6.5 inches apart, and a little back tack right at the end of the opening. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. There's my notch. I'll stop right there. I'm going to cut right to my last stitch. I'm not cutting the stitch, but I'm coming very, very close. I apologize if you can't see the white thread on here. I hope you would agree that it would be a crime to sew this in a contrasting thread. So now on the outside, I want to keep the seam allowance going off to my right, flip the pocket over the seam allowance, and flip this little top bit out above where I snipped. So that comes out. If you've got a little pucker here, it means you just didn't snip quite close enough to your stitch. And now I'm going to understitch here. Understitching means I'm sewing this pocket facing to the seam allowance below it. And again, I'm starting at the notch and finishing at the notch. But now I want to be opening that up. I want to feel that my seam allowance is still going toward the pocket and that I've got it flat as a pancake. And then I want to see where I'm finishing right down here. So what that understitching does is that it keeps the pocket facing to the inside, so we won't see it on the outside. It just gives a really nice edge to the pocket. Can you see that? There's my understitching. So the understitch is done on both. And now I'm going to flip out that little cutout above and below the opening. There shouldn't be a pucker there. And now I'm going to edge stitch here. And I want to hide my back tack. I don't want to start and stop with a back tack that's going to show. So I'll do my back tack in the seam allowance. Good. And then I'll come up right along that edge. And that understitching is just giving me a beautiful crisp edge here. And then again, an angle into the seam allowance to do my back tack. Good. So there's the edge of my pocket. So nice and crisp, right? I love that technique. My second pocket piece does not go on the back. It goes right side together with my first pocket piece here. So the 2 pocket pieces right side together. If you're making pants or something and you might have to take in the side seam, then I don't recommend this technique because you can't. You can't take in your side seam after this pocket is sewn. And the sort of more normal way that you might be familiar with, you still can take it in. On a skirt like this, I'm not going to take it in. And so I'm fine to do this technique. I think it's so much nicer. I've got the skirt panel out of the way. There's 2 layers here, right side together. Just the 2 pocket pieces. Good. Pocket is sewn. That's ready to go to the serger. So at the serger now, I'm just going to serge everything here that I can serge, starting with the pockets just around that edge. And on these panel pieces, I also want to serge the edge that's going to be forming the slits. And as I'm finishing with the serging, I'm placing those pieces at the iron. And then here's my chain of my 4 little seams. And then I'll just snip these apart. The bodice pieces go to the iron, and the facing pieces I will just serge around the whole bottom edge. I'll push the seam allowance toward the front on the facing. And then the only other thing I have to serge at this point is the sides of that center front panel. They make up the other side of the slit. Awesome. On the facing pieces, I just press the seam and go over the serged edge, just to set the thread and make that edge just lay nice and flat. And you remember on the facing, I press the seam allowance toward the front, and on the bodice, I want to press toward the back. That makes the seam allowances not stack on top of each other, so it just reduces bulk a little bit. So this piece is ready for the straps now. So I have a little loop turner like this. You can use a safety pin if your strap is wide enough, but the loop turner is kind of nice. It's got a little thumb and a finger. Sometimes it's tricky to get it started, so I'm going to trim down the seam allowance close at the top. You poke the thumb out through the fabric. See how the thumb is poking through and the finger is catching the edge of the fabric? And then it'll slide through. All right. So there we go. That's a nice little strap. I'll give that a press. So these little straps, I'll try to keep the seam at one side. Beautiful. Trim off the ends. I only need these to be 6 inches plus seam allowance on either side. So that's good. If there's a side that looks better than the other, you want to have the good side down onto the good side of your fabric. And this has to not twist and make its way all the way around to the back here. And then without twisting, it needs to make its way to the other side. So this whole facing goes right side together with the top. I'll be sewing the facing and the bodice together. When you're sewing over a strap, you cannot sew in a point there. You have to come up straight across the strap and then down. It also does not look good if you have a funny looking corner sticking out. So where you want to pivot is right at the strap. So I'm going to come up. When I hit the strap, pivot, straight across the strap, pivot, and down. But of course, I won't be able to see the strap at that point. I'll just have to feel. The tricky part here is that the strap has to tuck in. It's going to come out, of course, at the end, but when I'm sewing it together, it has to be tucked in between the layers, but it's shorter than the layers that I'm tucking it in between. So that's going to make sort of a funny bunchy shape. Now here, notice this is where I push the seam allowance of the facing toward the front and the seam allowance of the bodice toward the back so that I can match the seams up, but the bulk of the two seams is going in opposite directions. So I'll put one pin before the strap, one pin after the strap. Good. So it looks kind of funny right now because there's the strap, right? This is the underarm, and it's going to sew together fine. It just looks funny when you're pinning it. Anyway, this part is ready to go back to the machine. While I'm still at the iron, I'll press that pocket flat. And again, it's all about setting the thread on that serged edge so that that piece just lays nicely underneath and doesn't show like a bumpy edge. Here's the side panel. This is my pocket opening here, right? So now to finish off my side seam, the back is going to be sewing onto here, sort of a normal straight stitch. I want to be sewing straight along here, catch the corner, not catch the edge of the pocket, and then catch the corner again here. So again, I won't be able to see it. I'm just going to have to feel. Well, I can feel that edge really quite easily. But if you're afraid that you can't feel it, then move it out of the way a bit and put a pin over here. As long as your corners are already secured and pinned nicely, then you can pin the pocket out of the way. It does make it a little bit easier. I'll pin both side seams like that. So here you can see it with the pocket side up. Let's go back to the machine. This is round 2 of sewing now. So I'm starting at the side seam of the facing. Okay, so here's that little pivot I was talking about. I need to stay at my 15 line or 5/8 line. I need to feel where that strap is. It's right there. So I'm going to come straight up to the strap. Good. And then pivot and go straight across the strap. And I can feel the edge of the strap there. And then pivot again. I'll do that on all 4 ends of the straps. For the V front, I just visualize it when I'm perpendicular, I guess, to that V. That's where I'll pivot. Right there. So that when I turn, I'm right back at my same guideline. If you have a hard time visualizing that as you're sewing, you can just draw with your erasable pen, draw the 5/8 line, 5/8 line, or 15 line, and then where they cross is where you want to do your pivot. I'm going to be trimming and understitching this whole neckline, but first I want to just check out how my corners came out. Yeah, that one felt a little bit wide. I'm going to trim off a smidge on both sides of that one. I can feel it. I'll even draw myself a line. I'm going to go there and here. So then when I'm happy with the corner, I'll just trim off the excess. That's what I like. That's what I'm talking about. Good, good. Good, and now I need to do the rest of the trimming. I need to just do one clip, and it's right at the V, almost to my stitch. You need to make sure that it can open right out like that. I don't have to clip anything on the straight section of the V. Under the arm, you have to clip enough so that the seam allowance spreads out like that, and you can tell that when you turn it, it's not going to be pulling or binding. Now, this seam of the facing to the bodice does not get serged because it's all enclosed. So this doesn't go to the serger, it's going to go next to the iron, but before I do that, I'm going to understitch. I don't want this facing to be sneaking out and showing on the outside. So to understitch, I want to push that seam allowance toward the facing, and then I'll be sewing just a millimeter or 2, maybe 1/8 of an inch or less onto those 3 layers, facing and 2 layers of seam allowance. When you're understitching, you cannot get up into a corner. You just can't get that flat. So I'll be skipping all 4 corners and the front V. So I'm going to start as high as I can get into one peak of the strap and feel to make sure the seam allowance is always going toward the facing. It's important to clip your seams before you understitch, just so you can really flatten it out. And I'll just go as high as I can into the next peak. And then as soon as I can't flatten it out, then I have to stop with a back tack. So this is the front. So I don't want to go around that V. That'll kind of round it out. I can feel my cutout here where I snipped, and I'll stop at that cutout, even a little bit before. Come around to the other side of that V. There you go. You get the idea. There's the understitching all done. It's such a nice edge now. Oh, it's beautiful. You have to feel it. The last thing I want to do to this before I take it over to the iron is just tame down the sides of that facing. I want to tack this down to the seam allowance. There's the edge of the facing. I want to tack it to the seam allowance. So I'm just grabbing the facing and the seam allowance only. I'm not going to be sewing right through the garment because then my little back tack would show. But I'm making sure everything's sitting nicely. This is where the facing wants to lie. And I'm just back tacking on the seam allowance and catching that facing down. You don't see anything on the outside. There's no back tack showing. It's just tacking the facing to the seam allowance. Good, so I'll just do that to the 2 sides. The bodice is done. It's going back to the iron. But while I'm at the machine, I'll sew those side seams. this is another situation where I have to just feel that edge. I want to catch the corner right there, but not catch the opening of the pocket. So I can run my nail along the edge of that pocket. I can feel that very clearly. There's my pocket opening. There's the corner I definitely want to catch. But that's also another situation where I can check it afterwards and go back in and sew in a little closer if I want to. Oh, that corner is beautiful, right? You don't see a gap between my pocket edge and the side seam. And same here. Okay. Alrighty, and then the last thing I'll do at the machine before I head over to that serger is sew together the two edges that I've already serged. This is the center front panel going into the side panel where the slit is. So I'm just sewing from the top to the slit. And I'm just planning ahead for that turn, that double turn I'm going to be doing on the slit. So I'm going to be sewing with the edge of my presser foot running beside the serging. So just a slightly bigger seam allowance. So I'll do both sides of that center panel the same way. And then we'll head to the serger and I will just serge the side seams. And I might as well serge the bottom edges of the skirt now too. I don't think I will serge across the bottom edge because I think for my hem I'll do a small double turn. That'll be nicer. So that means that all the serging is done. Let's head over to the iron. All right, so the bodice is over here waiting for me to trim some threads and give it a final press. Oh my gosh, I'm so in love. This silk has been an absolute pleasure to work with. Alrighty, the skirt. The side seam now is just going to press toward the back. So here is one of the slits. From the top of the opening up, I'm just going to press that open. And then below the opening, I will just take that serging, turn it once, and turn it twice. There's the first fold. The serging, honestly, it makes that first turn so easy. And then a second turn. Keep it skinny, skinny against that serging. Oh, yes. And then this should flow right into the same fold as my opening there. This is a dream, honestly. Oh, such a pleasure to work with a nice quality fabric. To sew this slit, all I'll be doing is just sewing close to that outer edge, across and down. I actually love the feeling of this rolled hem with the serging so much that I'm actually going to hem the bottom first in the same way. I am going to serge. I don't normally serge when I do a double folded hem, but I actually like this feeling. And you know what? The four threads actually give more weight and stability. I think it'll make the dress hang nicer. So before I sew that slit closed, I'm going to serge the bottom edge and hem the bottom because I'll get a nicer corner if the bottom is done first. I am going to press this hem the same way I did the slit, and I'll sew the hem first and then do the slit. So I don't normally serge and then turn twice. I either serge and turn once, or I don't serge and turn twice. But I'm actually in love with this serge and turn twice. The feeling of this hem is just so pro. It's beautiful. Okay, I love it. Here I'm going up one side of the slit. And that serged edge is also helping me to not distort this edge and stretch it out of shape. I can keep this nice and taut because that serged edge is holding it stable inside there. And then to go across, I like to have it closed. I know everything is sitting nicely so that when I go across, it's going to make the right shape at the top of this long skinny rectangle of the slit. Nice clean pivots on both sides. I'll do the other slit, and then it's just time to join the bodice to the skirt. The skirt is just a little bit bigger around than the bodice. So I just ran to the machine and sewed a long basting stitch or a gathering stitch across the top of the skirt. Here's the bodice. There's the V of the front. So I've got the skirt inside out, the bodice right side out. The bodice goes inside and match up the side seams. Can use that gathering stitch then to just pull up the skirt just enough to make it fit the bodice. Then I can pin the edges together. So now as I'm joining the bodice to the skirt, I want to sew this at the 20 line or 3/4 of an inch. And I can just work in those gathers as I go. In retrospect, I should have added more seam allowance to the bottom of the bodice and the top of the skirt. I should have added 3/4 of an inch seam allowance there. That would have been smart, knowing that I was doing the waistband like this. But hopefully this dress is forgiving enough that I can take it up that extra little bit and I'll still be fine. But I will make a note on that pattern for myself for next time to add that bit of seam allowance. It's in my serging that I will be leaving a gap. And I don't want to be cutting off really anything here because I need the space between my stitching and the edge of the serging. I need that little space to fit the elastic. And this is where I started, so I'll chain off right here. And that's the gap that I will put the elastic through and then just finish off that bit of serging after. And there are definitely different ways of doing this elastic casing, but I find this to be the simplest. Pin that together, try it on like that, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I will love the final look, and then I'll show you. Okay, I just tried it on. It's absolutely lovely. I'll just finish off the elastic and the casing. And so you just close up your casing like that. Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. I am done this dress.
Okay, both dresses are done, and I'm absolutely in love with both of them. And you know what? Tomorrow morning, I'm heading to Puerto Vallarta to meet a dear friend of mine for a few days. I'm super excited about the trip. Both dresses are going to come with me, and hopefully I can include a few shots at the end of walks on the Malecon, walks on the beach, wearing these dresses. The thrifted one was super fast, and I love the change now. Just having the vertical lines instead of that horizontal that stopped at the side seam, that really bothered me, and now I just love it. And then I've also got the pattern that I can use again and again for different variations. I can make little tweaks to it. It's just beautiful. This one though, just the quality of this silk was such an absolute pleasure to work with, and the final feeling of it, the final flow, I feel like $1,000,000 in this dress. This soft silk and the way it's flowing and the two slits, that's just going to be such a pleasure to wear on the Malecon in Puerto Vallarta. So thank you so much for sticking with me through that whole process of making the pattern and sewing up this dress. It was an absolute pleasure to do. I hope you enjoyed watching it. And until next time on Catherine Sews, you take care. A ti, a ti, a ti.